Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's legal impact webinar. We are very happy to have you here. Today, we are going to be discussing the Texas age verification ruling that SCOTUS has made just about 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago. And now that the Supreme Court has ruled on that age verification law, the adult industry can discuss its impact and what the future holds. I am ClaraKitty, and I am going to be introducing everyone. We have Corey Silverstein, Lawrence G. Walters, and Mike Stabile. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Start with Mike. He's got the cooler mustache.
I think I've got the only mustache, right? So
Mine's
low
invisible.
bar. So I'm Mike Stabile. I am Director of Public Policy at Free Speech Coalition. I have been involved with these laws going back to the original Louisiana law. I've been with FSC for much longer than that, but that was when we sort of first picked up on this. Obviously I am, at the state level lobbying for these, lobbying against these laws and working with legislators on alternatives, which is something we'll talk about. And then also, obviously, I've been involved in the legal fight, though I am not a First Amendment attorney. I play one sometimes on Zoom.
Larry.
Sir, I am actually a First Amendment attorney. I'm the operator of Walters Law Group, based in Florida. We represent clients throughout the world in the adult industry. We've been involved in challenges to age verification laws and regulation of the internet since 1996 and the Blue Ribbon campaign that some of the old timers might remember. And so, been following these issues closely and looking forward to answering your questions.
Awesome. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Corey Silverstein, not Steen, like Clara said.
I panicked. I'm sorry.
I'll go with Stein. You
I panicked.
Tell me whatever you want. I used to be a First Amendment attorney before this decision came out. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. For those of you who don't know me, I've been around for about 20 years now in the industry. Anyone who wants to reach me, get a hold of me, you can always reach me through my social media at My Adult Attorney. Or, of course, you can go to my website or just scream out of a window and you'll probably find me. Now, that being said, Clara, do you want to give them you want to lay out the rules?
I wanted to give a quick reminder to everyone to please be kind to your fellow human here in the chat. I would also like to remind everyone that this is meant to be about facts. I know it's going to be really, really hard for everyone to remove their feelings from this, but we really, really, really want to focus on the facts and what's going on and nothing beyond that. If you guys could please hold your questions till the end of the discussion, we would really appreciate that because they are going to get lost in chat otherwise.
All right, so first and foremost, I have to thank, hopefully some of our friends from SegPay are here. SegPay was kind enough to sponsor today's event. I am greatly and forever in gratitude for them for being such awesome industry supporters. Kathy Beardsley herself is one of the board members on the Free Speech Coalition. And so we're very grateful for the hard work that she's done in particular and for being here. Well, maybe she's here, who knows, maybe not. Someone from SegPay is probably here. Regardless, this is a big one, guys. And that leads us to what is our topic today? As some of you might have heard, the United States Supreme Court 2 weeks ago, it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow, released a decision on the case of the Free Speech Coalition versus Texas. This was obviously a monumental day, a massive, frankly, event that'll go on in the history of this industry and First Amendment law for, frankly, the rest of history. We know that in the last 2 weeks, a lot of people have been going through a lot of feelings, angst, fear, concern, your feelings, your comments, everything, nothing has gone unnoticed. We've been working very hard to try to, address everyone. But now that we've had a minute for time to pass, what we're really going to focus on today is we want to give you guys facts. We want to give you guys facts, and we want you guys to know, okay, the decision's done. Yes, it sucked. Where do we go from here? Where are we going from here? That's why we picked this topic, and hopefully between the four of us here today, we'll be able to put on a good presentation for you. So that being said, DJ Clara, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So we are obviously here today discussing how the Supreme Court ruled and what the future holds, but it's important to provide a little history for those of you that don't completely understand how we got here. So Mike, Texas age verification law was one of the first in the wave of AV laws across the United States. Why did the Free Speech Coalition feel it was so important to challenge its constitutionality?
Well, because it was unconstitutional, right? And I think that the Texas law was, as you said, one of the early laws. It started in Louisiana with a sort of Baptist theologian, sex therapist, introducing a bill that passed. We looked at that, and other states started picking that up. Texas was one of them. Texas was sort of unique in that not only did it require age verification, but it also required adult sites to post a health warning on all of their products, basically saying that, and I wish I were being grand in summarizing this, but it basically said, if you watch porn, you'll get brain damage, and that you'll cause child sex trafficking, and that it is addictive, and it's all of these things. So our members and the adult industry more broadly needed to fight back against that, right? That couldn't stand. I think that we all understood at the beginning, given the composition of the court, if this eventually made it to the Supreme Court, that there were risks involved with this. But the risks of us not bringing that case meant that the law would stand, right? And that Texas would go on. So it was, it was something we decided to challenge. Existing Supreme Court precedent had said for, over 20 years, had said that you can't restrict the internet to just what's acceptable for minors, right? That if you are going to restrict speech, you have to do it in a way that is really the narrowly tailored and the least restrictive means of doing it. And IDs are not that, right? That was something that the court had ruled in the late 90s. It had reaffirmed many times that, there are solutions. There are, internet filters. There are ways in which you can protect your minors from accessing all of the stuff, not just sex content, but all of the stuff that might not be appropriate for minors. And that age verification was a burden. We had already seen in a number of states that when people attempted to do age verification, that the vast majority of consumers went somewhere else. They refused to do it. It's quite invasive in terms of scanning your face and uploading an ID. Most people would hit the back button or get a VPN. Certainly sites that are outside the US were not complying with this. What we were seeing was, a real existential threat to the industry, right? Institute these laws, watch your traffic go someplace else, or challenge them. And so we challenged it. It went to the district court. A conservative district court judge looked at it and said, this law is absolutely unconstitutional. This, for all of the reasons that we laid out, including precedent, the Supreme Court has said multiple times that this is unconstitutional. You can't do it this way. If you're going to restrict speech, there's a category which Larry can talk about more explicitly, strict scrutiny that's applied to First Amendment laws. It essentially means it has to be the last resort. If you're going to restrict speech online or off, it absolutely, and you're the government, it absolutely has to be the last resort, right? You must have tried other things. And if you're going to do it, you have to make sure that it doesn't have a lot of other side effects. So the district court looked at that, said, absolutely not. At the same time, we were going and filing cases in other states, in other district courts, having the same result, right? Each district court judge would look at this and say, no, not on your life. This has so many problems with it. We can't, these were sort of barn burner decisions. Then you get up to, in Texas's case, the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit is an appeals court, essentially a higher level court that was, in a incredibly conservative district court, right? They are known for their sort of rogue decisions. So they looked at this and they said, okay, the health warning is clearly the government telling you what you have to say. That's a violation of the First Amendment. That's compelled speech. That's the government saying you have to, say a certain thing, clearly prohibited. But this age verification, we think that this stands, right? We think that this deserves a lower level of scrutiny. We think that if the state needs to do it to protect kids, then it should be constitutional. And we think that the Supreme Court got it wrong. a really, really brash thing for the Fifth Circuit to say, right? Basically they said that this was comparatively, like, rather than talking about laws around internet, we think that this is closer to, someone selling a kid a Playboy, right? Which is clearly banned and nobody complains about. So we appealed that decision to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court granted a cert, meaning they were going to hear the case. That case was heard in January. I was in the room. We watched the justices debate this, and we watched, our attorneys, contest it. One of the things that was sort of immediately apparent in that is that the justices were generally okay. They thought, hey, listen, we need to do something to keep kids from accessing adult content. But what can the state do? How far can they go in terms of restricting this type of speech? And there was a robust debate in terms of, like, how far can you push it? Can the state make you go to the DMV and bring a notarized document and of your birth certificate and get permission to go online to access that? Texas was saying, yeah, we have that right. Texas was arguing that anything that they wanted to do to protect minors basically was constitutional and should be constitutional. So we heard that. We awaited the decision. I think that everybody I wouldn't say everybody, because obviously there are people in Texas that Paxton and some of the advocates on that side thought the Supreme Court would go their way, meaning they would say that rather than strict scrutiny, which is the last resort category, rational basis, which is the state can basically do what it wants category of review. All this, the legal community, the First Amendment legal community in particular, said, there's no way that the court is going to go with Texas, right? It is too far gone. It's not going to be able to do that. It's probably going to reaffirm strict scrutiny. It's going to send it back to the Fifth Circuit and say, hey, listen, you got it wrong. You have to apply strict scrutiny, but maybe this law will meet that standard, right? Basically, maybe this is the last resort. Maybe this is the best way that you can do it, and there's not a better way to do it. We knew that there was going to be some mischief. We did not expect, I think that probably we would have calculated about 5% that they would have come down with this middle standard, which is intermediate. Wait, what am I?
Intermediate scrutiny.
I was like, intermediate basis, intermediate scrutiny. Thanks, Larry. And come down and do it. So that's where we are now. They basically said, hey, listen, we think that it doesn't have to be a high standard, right? That we think that it doesn't have to be the last resort. It just has to be generally in good faith, right? There's again, Larry and Corey can talk a little bit more about the contours of intermediate scrutiny, but they basically said, yeah, if you're protecting kids away from this type of material, if you need to age gate it, we don't think that's a free speech concern, right? Because age verification is not speech, right? And even though this is content-based, even though this is about porn, and even though there should be all these restrictions, we don't think that this is it. I don't think, if you look at the coverage of the decision outside sort of the partisans of it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think the dissents from Kagan, basically, and others basically said, I don't see how this logic makes sense. What it feels like is they had a decision that they wanted to get to, which was, we do want to give the states the ability to restrict the internet. And we're going to find a way to do it. And we're going to find a way to change what precedent was and say, well, we didn't quite mean that. And maybe it was that. It's a very, very strange decision.
I really appreciate your answer, and you kind of answered my next question in the first one as well, which was how the trial court ruled, and then the Texas Court of Appeals. And then my last part of that question was really, how did the case end up getting to the Supreme Court? But I think you also answered that too. So I guess our last question regarding this particular thing and of all the cases the Free Speech Coalition has filed is, what are you going to be doing with the Free Speech Coalition's other pending cases that it has filed in other states?
So we're looking at two different things, right? One, there are pending cases. So we have cases in Tennessee, we have cases in Montana, we have cases in Louisiana, Indiana. There may be a few others. And we're looking at, and there may be cases in states that have not been sued yet. Basically, right now, as I talked about that last resort standard, right? This strict scrutiny. What it meant was if we were going to court, we could say, hey, listen, the state hasn't tried anything else. They haven't even, seen if there's a better way to do this. Clearly, this is unconstitutional because they haven't looked at other options, and we believe there are other options. That might be device-based, that might be filters, that might be a PSA telling parents to turn on, a filter on their kids' devices, right? There are lots of other ways to do this that don't have such a huge impact on adults' access to this material. So with strict scrutiny, we were in good shape, right? It was still going to be a fight, but we were going to do it. With this lower level of intermediate scrutiny, we now have to look and say, do we have a case in these states, right? How restrictive is their law? And do we have a chance of winning? The reason this is important, in some states, in Florida, we have already dismissed, our case, right? It's there's not much of a path. There's a very narrow path, but probably not one that is worth pursuing given resources. But in other states, you see states where they have much more restrictive laws, right? And I think that this is something we need to look at in the future as we go through, right? This is not the end of a fight. This is the beginning of a fight, unfortunately for us, right? Because what we're going to see is states become more and more aggressive. Most of the states that have passed age verification laws have said, okay, it only applies to content where or sites that have 33 and a third percent material harmful to minors, right? That's broadly used to mean pornography, though it's can include other things as well. They can drop that, right? Or they can make the restrictions greater. So if you look at Tennessee, for instance, Tennessee has a law that you have to verify every 60 minutes, right? You have to go through that process of scanning your face and uploading your ID. Now, there may be a chance to continue with that and say, hey, listen, this isn't, adequately meant just to block minors. This is a bad faith attempt to block adults. And there you have a chance to continue a challenge. So, I don't think that FSC has decided, other than Florida, where we're going to definitively continue those challenges, but we're looking at those and figuring out what is our path here, what resources do we have, can we pursue it? And I think that we look at other states as well. South Dakota just passed a law that said any site with any amount of material harmful to minors has to age verify, right? That's going to mean Twitter. That's going to mean Blue Sky. That's going to mean Reddit. That's going to mean Instagram in some cases. So I think that we're looking at all these. We're looking at our allies. It's important for us, even as disappointing as the decision was, we need to make sure that they can't push further because the people behind these laws do not believe that adult content should be legal. I cannot stress that enough. And they are going to be emboldened by this decision. They are going to try to push the envelope as far as possible. And while I think that there are paths to challenging some of these laws, and I think that there are alternatives that we can look at that I think can lessen the burden on adult businesses, we are going to have to play on the defensive again. And we're going to have to make sure that they don't come up with things that say, hey, listen, you do have to go to the DMV and get a notarized document if you want to go on adult sites, and you have to do it every week, right? They're going to try things to make it so that it's impossible for the adult industry to operate in businesses. They've laid out these plans, and it's not just age verification. So the fight is on.
Thank you very much, Mike. We really appreciate your answers. Ultimately, the Supreme Court decided to apply intermediate scrutiny in this case, and the state of Texas won the case. How surprising and unusual was this? Larry, I guess it's your question now.
Well, I think Mike did a great job in kind of in plain English describing, what happened and the different levels of scrutiny. The decision was surprising. I agree. It was a slim chance that the Supreme Court would, rule the way they did from all the prior precedent and the previous cases that were decided on very similar facts to this. But that's ultimately what happened. The FSC argued that strict scrutiny should apply because that has been the rule and the precedent from the Supreme Court and other district court and circuit court cases for 20 years. Texas said, no, this is just like showing your ID in an adult bookstore. And everybody realizes that that's permissible. That kind of law is subjected to rational basis scrutiny, which is the lowest level test, and just about all laws pass that. On the other hand, just about all laws that are subjected to strict scrutiny fail. It's really a dead end for the government. Once you're subjected to strict scrutiny, you're probably going to lose the case as the government. But the 6 justices on the Supreme Court had other plans for this case, and they didn't tip their hand at all, really, during oral argument. This case was teed up as, is it going to be strict scrutiny? Is it going to be rational basis? And the justices, I think they knew what they were going to do, and didn't really want to get in the weeds on, the challenges to that analysis on intermediate scrutiny. They didn't want to have a debate about whether it was the proper level of scrutiny, because they knew that they were going to do it. And they didn't want those arguments tested. And that's ultimately, what they did. Intermediate scrutiny is not really used in this kind of case. It hasn't been in the past. It has been used in cases that where a law imposes some barrier to the exercise of a constitutional right, like the right to marry or the right to purchase a gun. The states can impose some reasonable restrictions, time, place, and manner restrictions on those kinds of activities. And so the court had to, essentially work some judicial wizardry and squeeze this case into a strict scrutiny analysis. And they did so in a very kind of disingenuous way, in my view. And what they did is to say there are 2 parts to what's happening here. One is the attempted access to the speech, which is not protected in the absence of age verification. And then there's the viewing of the content, which is protected. So the government can require age verification because there's no constitutional right to view explicit content without age verification. And it's sort of, disaggregating or disassembling the activity involved in going on an adult website and trying to say this part's unprotected, this part is protected. The government can impose restrictions on the unprotected part. Intermediate scrutiny is a lot easier to satisfy than strict scrutiny. If the law serves an important governmental interest, which nobody really contests that, keeping kids away from hardcore porn is an important governmental interest, has historically been found to be. And if, the law substantially is related to achieving that interest, not the least restrictive alternative, but is just substantially related to achieving that interest, then it will survive the test. And that's what the court found. Justice Thomas said, this law easily survives the intermediate scrutiny test, and it only incidentally burdens the rights of adults to access adult content online, which, many pages of briefing were dedicated to showing that that is not the case, that there are very significant burdens imposed by showing an ID online and disclosing that information, personal information on an ID, having that flow through various different online intermediaries where it can be hacked or breached, where people can be exploited or ransomed. But the court just essentially ignored all of those concerns and said, no, this law easily passes the test, and we're going to uphold it based on strict scrutiny. The real question is, what else does that mean? What does a decision like this mean for other types of content or other laws? So it is a concerning decision. They had to really wrestle with the prior precedent and distinguish it, and talk about how the internet has changed, that more kids have cell phones, the content is more hardcore, there's ready access by everybody with Wi-Fi to the internet, and kids can easily get access to inappropriate material. And so what Texas did was fine and dandy, and that was upheld, meaning that most of the other laws, like Mike said, will likely be upheld under this test.
And with intermediate scrutiny, while neither the state of Texas nor the industry ever suggested it, some legal analysts are saying that the Supreme Court split the baby on that ruling. Do you agree with that?
It is a way of splitting the baby. It would have been devastating if the court had said the Fifth Circuit got it completely right, that all the government has to do is satisfy the rational basis test. That would mean that just about any restriction on accessing an adult website or any website with any amount of allegedly harmful material would be just okay. and approved under that test. There's some saving grace in the fact that the court applied a higher level of scrutiny than rational basis. That means that there are some arguments that can be made against other laws or other restrictions on harmful material. So it was a way of splitting the baby, but it was a result-oriented decision. The justices wanted to find a way to uphold the Texas law and allow age verification, but without sacrificing other types of speech. So, they want to be able to say that strict scrutiny still applies if the government were to, let's say, restrict access to speech about guns or, other favored topics. So they were very careful in how they crafted the decision to not do damage to the type of speech that, they may want to try to protect, but to allow Texas to require age verification for material that's obscene as to minors.
And given the Supreme Court's ruling, do you believe other challenges to state AV laws will fare? And for example, Tennessee's AV law has a criminal component. Do you believe that the challenge that law should or will proceed?
Yeah, Mike was addressing that a little bit, and I can fill in some more. The Texas law requires age verification every 60 minutes or every user session, whichever is shorter. So every time you log on, or every 60 minutes, sorry. So, every time you're on a site and you're on there for more than an hour, you got to re-verify. If you log off and go back on in 5 minutes, you got to re-verify. And there are felony consequences for the operator for failing to age verify. That's a much more significant restriction, and the penalties are obviously much more severe. Putting somebody in prison for potentially years is more severe than paying a fine under the Texas law. And so a court could look at that and say, okay, maybe this goes too far, even under the intermediate scrutiny test. There's the Alabama law that requires operators to have notarized consent forms for every person that's depicted on the content that appears on the site. That's another restriction that the Supreme Court didn't address in the Paxton case, which may not survive scrutiny, but it's important to know that it's out there for this audience because that law is in effect. So yeah, I think that there are ways in which the government could go too far and a law would fail even the intermediate scrutiny test. If we were stuck with the rational basis test, I think the industry would essentially be dead meat in regards to any of the challenges it would want to assert in the future or against any of these other existing laws. But there are some ways forward, and some of the cases, may well be meritorious even in light of the Paxton decision.
And my next question for you is, how will the ruling affect the publication of sexually oriented speech generally?
Yeah, that's the key question here, right? What does this mean regarding publication of speech on the internet that's sexually explicit or other types of harmful speech? One good thing about this decision is that it is limited to content that is obscene as to minors. The court did not talk about other types of harmful speech, and we see the legislatures in other states imposing age verification obligations on, let's say, social media sites because they allow for other kinds of harmful speech, allegedly harmful speech, stuff like suicide or self-harm, or eating disorders, having nothing to do with obscenity as to minors or sexually explicit speech. So that is a saving grace that the analysis in the Paxton decision was limited solely to this category of speech that's harmful to minors. So if states tried to apply the same kind of age verification obligation on speech that is, let's say, violent or otherwise harmful to minors in the view of the state legislatures, the Paxton case wouldn't control. And so, that is helpful. But, the problem that we face now is that I think we're going to see a lot of online platforms over moderate and over censor sexually oriented speech so as not to be caught within the percentage thresholds that apply in these states. So most of them, require that you age verify if you have more than 33 1/3% harmful content. How that's calculated, nobody knows. But that's the threshold. And so I could see a lot of online platform operators, particularly the large ones, may want to cut back on how much they allow, or try to impose greater content moderation standards, eliminate more hardcore speech and only allow softcore, those kinds of things, so as to try to escape coverage by these laws. And if a decision has to be made whether to allow or not allow something because it might trigger an age verification obligation, I could see the filters and the algorithms immediately defaulting to do not allow, because the last thing some of these large operators are going to want to do, Twitter or Instagram, Meta, they're not going to want to impose age verification on every single user. Millions and millions of users, lots of money to do that. And so I think that, unfortunately, sexually oriented speech in general will fare more poorly as a result of the decision. And so that's something that the industry is going to have to struggle with. But there may be challenges to other types of laws that try to impose age verification on harmful material that does not involve sex.
And
that's
also, I was
sorry.
going to just jump in because I want to point out that this harmful materials definition, harmful to minors, obscenous to minors, it's different in different states. What they call it, but it's this general, it's the same general category. What we're seeing, at least on the right, is a activist and legislative movement to broaden that definition, right? Not to change the definition of harmful to minors or sexual materials, but to include in that anything that is LGBTQ, right? So what we see there's been a push this past year, the past couple of years, in libraries to sort of parallel to what we deal with online, where there's liability if you allow if a minor is able to access material harmful to minors online on your website. What they've been doing in libraries is to say, well, we think that this book, maybe it's in some cases, it's a book about penguins that are gay and raise a child, right? They're children's books. Sometimes it's a book about pride. Sometimes it's a graphic novel for young adults. Sometimes it's things like Beloved, right? Or 1984, right? They're saying anything in some of these states. What they're arguing is that any book, at least the legislators are arguing this, right? And then the activists on the conservative side who are bringing this legislation are saying that counts as material harmful to minors. We think that this falls within the definition. We don't think there's any value in someone under 18 reading about sexual assault. We think that is, or reading about LGBTQ identity. We think that is sexualizing minors. We think that's offensive as what's available to minors, or what should be available to minors, and we don't think there's any value to it. So we think that it fits this test. I think that anybody who looks at this thinks, well, that's wildly overly aggressive, right? That they can't possibly do that to, we're talking about porn here, right? And I think that the legislation and the coverage of this was like, oh, it allows it to block material harmful to minors on porn sites. Unfortunately, the decision just says, intermediate scrutiny applies when you're trying to segregate by age material harmful to minors. And I think that what we're going to see is that there are going to be more challenges and more legislative pushes to try to use that to create liability for people who deal with speech regarding around sexuality or gender. Again, I see the same language in Florida, right? The Attorney General recently went after Hillsborough County schools and said, hey, listen, you have 60 books in here that we think are patently pornographic, right? And I will be clear, they're talking about classic works of literature, but they think they said, we think that these fail the harmful to minors test. The same test that was used in Texas, the same test that is in the Supreme Court case. We think that these fail these. You better take these out of your library. And the superintendent of schools took them out of the library. In Missouri and in the other states, they went after Target a couple of years ago. They said, your Target's pride displays, these boas and this drag material fails the harmful to minors test. We're going to investigate you if you don't remove it. So if that went to court, right, you would like to think that is going to be unsuccessful, right? That people are going to say, well, this doesn't match this. You're being wildly, overly aggressive in terms of your censorship. But we're in a particular conservative moment. We've seen that what seems reasonable and what should apply doesn't always. So I think that when Larry's talking about platforms like Meta and X and things like that might try to get it under, we may see a push, even if it's a rhetorical push, to try to get these platforms to limit that type of content. And to age verify if you're going to access these type of contents, to avoid, in some of these cases, lawsuits from parents, right? Because most of these states aren't doing it just from attorney generals, right? It's parents can bring a case. And so a parent may say, my child went onto Facebook. They were in this chat group that was, gender identity, and I think that harmed them. I'm going to sue you.
And
Yeah,
this was a really good lead in from you and Larry for this next question for Larry, which is, does this ruling affect other laws restricting access to harmful speech?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Mike's reference to libraries is perfect, because what happens if a state says, okay, in light of this Paxton ruling, we're going to pass a law that says that you have to show an ID to get into a library. Well, you have no right as an adult to access materials that are harmful to minors that may be in the library without showing an ID. That's what the Supreme Court says. So why can't we force a library to require that everybody show an ID before getting in, or require that libraries have all supposedly harmful material in a back room or in the shame area where everybody knows, oh, you're looking at bad stuff. Those kinds of laws could easily pop up, and the concern here is that the Paxton decision could apply to that fact pattern, although there are good arguments that it does not, because it is only about online speech. And I think that argument would ultimately be successful, but I wouldn't be surprised if some states try.
Thank you, Larry. And thank you again, Mike. I appreciate both of you. And on that note, the spirit and morale for the adult industry has taken a major blow during this. What is the future for age verification in the United States? And is this a major turning point in how successful the adult industry can be, Corey?
Well, the first thing I want to mention is that, Mike, I'm a big fan of that book about the gay penguins, and so let's not be too hard on that book. I like that book. Look, the last 2 weeks have been really hard. People have been reacting in ways that are, quite frankly, completely normal, and we expected to see this sort of reaction. Quite honestly, this is not what I was expecting. I've been studying the First Amendment all through law school and then all through my legal career, so I've got about 20 something years into it, and being able to look at everyone and say, hey, I was wrong, it is difficult. I never thought they were going to do this. I didn't. I have to be honest about it. Don't agree with the decision even in the slightest. I think the Supreme Court completely got this wrong, but the Supreme Court doesn't really care what my vote is, so we have to respect where we are. The fact is, though, that age verification in the US now is reality. It's not going anywhere. Of course, as the Free Speech Coalition continues to challenge the various laws that it wants to challenge for different issues that it might have, the ultimate issue of age verification in the US is kind of a done deal. There's a lot of people out there that are still kind of thinking that there's a chance that this could happen, that could happen. We're there now. People are now going to have to accept the new reality that for the states that have these age verification laws, they're going to have to start making some very difficult choices, whether that be geo-blocking, whether that be compliance, whether that be some myriad of various maneuvering. There is going to be a substantial amount of change here. And, I've been asked this question so many times in the last 2 weeks, is like, is this a new day in the adult industry? It is a it is a pivot point in the adult industry. It's an opportunity in a time where everyone is going to have to ultimately change the direction that they might have been going, or they might have thought they were going to be able to continue to go. So yeah, that's the best answer I can give you to that question, Clara.
And to quell some anxiety, I think, for performers, free sites in particular are sounding the alarm. Are there dark days ahead? And what about performers and platforms in particular?
Well, look, let's start with free sites. Free site operators, they've got some very difficult days ahead. Ultimately, the majority of free sites depend on referral fees from other networks and being able to post a tremendous amount of, call it, teaser content. There's no exception for these sites. There's no exception under these age verification sites. It says if you're a free site, you don't have to comply. So for people who are operating free sites, whether it be, galleries, tubes, review sites, and the list goes on, they are immediately in a very different reality. They are going to have to either, one, change their sites dramatically. As Larry suggested before, we're going to be seeing people that are going to be playing with the 1/3 rule for those states that have the 1/3 rule. There's some states that don't even have the 1/3 rule. And then, as Mike said, there's another element to this is most of the state law definitions say actually material that may be harmful to minors. Do we actually even know what that means? Do we know, how far is an exposed breast material harmful to minor? Is a piece of lingerie that might be a little bit more revealing than a non-piece of lingerie? There's so many questions that we're now going to have, but for the operators of free sites that, again, they're dependent on commissions, referral fees from ultimately other pay sites, they are going to have some very difficult times ahead. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They're definitely going to be substantially impacted by this. Content creators are in a little bit of an interesting dilemma, because you have to kind of put content creators into two categories. You have content creators that create content and then utilize all the third-party sites out there, such as the Clips for Sales of the world, and the Loyal Fans, and the OnlyFans, and the list goes on. Everyone seems to have a site that has the word fans in it now. Those people that are putting their content onto those sites, for those creators, they're not going to have to worry too much about the age verification issue. Ultimately, it's going to be those websites that are hosting that content, where that content is actually being published out of. Those sites are really going to, take the burden of it. But where things get a little bit more complicated for creators is for a lot of the creators now are implementing things such as Linktree websites or their own websites. Now, those creators are directly going to have to address the age verification concern, meaning if a performer, regardless of whether they're operating a teaser site, a Linktree, a feeder site, it doesn't really matter. If it's their site, they're the ones putting up the content. Yes, these age verification laws are going to have to be paid attention to, or else they could face the same liability that any major platform could. Where this really hurts the individual content creator is, look, let's put our honesty hats on here. A lot of individual creators don't have the same financial resources that large platforms do. So this is going to hurt, and this is going to hurt their wallet. So, for creators that are utilizing Linktrees, free sites, so forth, they need to, take a step back, take a breath, and say, okay, what's on those sites? And as both Larry and Mike were insinuating before, this is going to mean that, in essence, we are going to have quite a bit of policing of content here. A lot of these sites, we're now going to be seeing content coming down. And if you go back to, this is a little bit off topic, but pulling it all back, the states can claim till they can scream at the top of their lungs till they're blue in the face that this is all about protecting children. Okay. And make no mistake about it. I'm not sitting out here, neither's Larry and neither's Mike. No one here. We're not sitting here saying that children should have unfettered access to adult entertainment. No one's saying that. But ultimately, I'm not buying that what the states are saying is that that's what this is all about. The states took this on because the far right wing movement, the conservatives, they want to control what people are seeing, what people have access to. And that means nudity, pornography, adult content. So what we have here, Clara, is yes, they can claim this is all about age verification, but the rolling effect of what we're going to see the internet now, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people, there's going to be a lot more content moderation. There's going to be a lot more content coming down. That's what they wanted. So unfortunately, they did get to achieve what was their ultimate goal of content police. And I'm sorry, I know that diverted a little bit from your question, but Mike and Larry made some good points earlier that I felt like we had to kind of tie it all together.
I'm going to jump in just a quick second too, in terms of what we've seen in states that have passed age verification laws and what this might mean for creators and for free sites for that matter. We have looked at data in sites that have passed age verification laws. What we see is a shift away from sites that are US based or have some US exposure to free sites that do not. Right. So sites that might be, maybe they were in Europe, maybe they are in India, maybe they're in Russia, maybe you don't know where they are because people disguise, who's running them, what it is. We see a dramatic uptick in people going to those sites. Often those are pirate sites, right? Often those are sites that are, not taking down copyrighted content or not taking down CSAM or things like that. So we're seeing a growth in traffic to those because if somebody goes on, Google and searches for MILF boobs, in Texas, and they get to Pornhub and Pornhub is blocked, or they get to another site and that site requires age verification, what do? They hit the back button, they go back to the search terms and they find one that is open, right? So we're seeing traffic shift. We're seeing traffic just like a game of whack-a-mole. It's moving that. For creators, this is especially dangerous because what's happening is people are moving towards pirated content, right? That means that if you are a creator in the past couple of years, you've seen your income go down, or you think that it's gotten harder. Part of that is going to be the fact that for half of the U.S. states, and you can't access that without an ID, right? If you're going on a fan site, you may have to present an ID. And there are a lot of fans that say, I'm not comfortable with it. I don't know that that's going. Even if that data gets deleted, even if all the promises are true that these age verification providers do, most consumers, and I'm talking 95%, get scared and they don't want to do it. It's also complicated. So if you are in your bedroom with your hand with one phone and the other doing God knows what, you don't necessarily want to stop, get out your ID, scan your face, do all of this stuff. It's not the appropriate. So I think that it is a danger for the industry. I also will say on a more hopeful note that this is a very inventive industry. This is an industry that is used to harsh climates and thriving in places where we cannot thrive otherwise, or without resources that other places do. So I think this is going to be, as Corey said, a tough time for the industry. And I think that it's important that we're going to continue to fight. But I also think that, this is not the end of the adult industry. This is an evolution point. There are going to be changes and we're going to adapt to them again. But that's sort of the history of our business.
And again, Mike, thank you for the perfect lead in. Oh, sorry, Larry.
No, just 2 quick points on what Mike was saying. One is, yes, we've absolutely been the inventive industry and the technological entrepreneurs. I would expect that, the cost of age verification will be driven down given, the ubiquitousness of the requirements and more sites that are adopting it. And that's good news for the industry. There will be uses of tokenization and AI and all these other platforms and technology that will help the industry adapt to the new requirements. And that's very important. Beyond that, there was concerns about who is covered by these laws and the sites that are outside the United States and they can just continue to offer this stuff and everybody will go there. That's a very dangerous assumption for those sites. There has already been enforcement actions that have been brought by Texas against out of country and offshore website operators. And, just the way that personal jurisdiction works, if you're, routinely engaging in contracts with U.S. individuals, there's probably going to be an argument that your site is subject to being sued in the United States or in one of the states in the U.S. So, perhaps they'll get that message and adoption will be more universal.
Again, two perfect lead-ins for my next two questions. And again, this certainly isn't the first time that the adult industry has been attacked, and nor will it be the last. You really already, both of you have spoken on the perseverance of the industry over the years, but I don't think it's a bad thing to overstate how much we will persevere. Corey?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are in the adult entertainment industry, okay? And to us, to the people that are here, that are listening today, that are going to be watching this video later on YouTube, obviously for us, it's a, the Supreme Court ruling was terrible. We hated it. We do hate it. We think it's wrong and so forth. But ultimately, in the 20 plus years that I've been in the industry, we have had numerous events, whether it be from shift in politics, whether it's a certain president gets elected, whether it's a certain person leaves office, whether it's a certain attorney general gets appointed. Time and time again, we have had these chapters of where this is it. This is going to be the end of the adult entertainment industry. This is what's going to be what kills us. And you can even go back. You can go back to the. It's funny, Aaron who's in the comments there took the words right out of my mouth. Can go back to the obscenity prosecution days. It's okay, Aaron. All of these things and all of these items are things that over and over again, this was it. This was going to be the end. Age verification is not going to be the end of the adult entertainment industry. The adult entertainment industry will pivot. It will adapt. Look, is it not going to be bumpy? Are there not going to be speed bumps? As Mike said, how he has already seen that there's been a shift in traffic. Are all of these things going to happen? Yes, of course they are. But is this going to be, the opportunity? Is this it? Is this the end? Is this where, tomorrow morning we wake up and sites are just shutting down and giving up? No, not even in the slightest, Clara. We have seen this before. The government isn't going to stop. The people that are on the far right, the conservatives, whether they're motivated by church, whether they're motivated by politics, whether they're motivated by, quite candidly, their own insanity, whatever it is that motivates them, they're not going to go away. They're still going to be there tomorrow. They're going to keep trying. They're going to keep coming. And the fact of the matter is that, yes, we lost this battle. In terms of, this particular case in the U.S. Supreme Court, the industry took a loss. Larry and I represented the Woodhull Freedom Foundation and the EFF in this case, and we authored a amici brief that was submitted to the U.S. Supreme Court. Doesn't feel good to lose, it's not a good feeling, and I don't enjoy it, and I don't enjoy having to admit that the Supreme Court didn't agree with my position. But at the end of the day, I believe what the industry will do is I believe we'll do what we always do best. We get smarter, we work harder, we get together, we come together as an industry, and we move forward to be prosperous together. Some people may not feel that way right now, but the fact is that history has taught us that no matter how hard the U.S. government has tried over the years to kill us, it hasn't worked. This isn't going to do it either.
Thank you again, Corey. I really appreciate that. And Larry, earlier you had mentioned some site operators talking about fleeing the U.S., but Corey, you had mentioned some of this stuff earlier. What do you say about these operators who are talking about fleeing the U.S. in an attempt to avoid the age verification issue?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big issue, and I've quite honestly, I have been doing my entire week and last week has been virtually dominated with meetings of U.S. website operators are saying, that's it, we're closing, we're not closing, excuse me, wrong term, we're moving, we're going to move somewhere else. This is kind of a little bit of a overreaction and a fallacy in terms of what it's going to mean for them. Whether your business is incorporated in New York or whether your business is incorporated in Malta or whatever other, foreign country jurisdiction you come up with. It's not going to change the fact that if you are providing your content into a jurisdiction that has an age verification law, you are going to have to comply. So, it's a natural reaction, Clara. It's a natural reaction for people to say, well, I'm going to try to flee to warmer shores or what have you. But then when you slow down and you say, well, wait a second, I'm not sure if you've been following, but the UK has gotten incredibly aggressive on age verification. France has gotten incredibly aggressive on age verification. Germany has now gotten incredibly aggressive on age verification, and it's spreading all through Europe. So to those people out there that are saying, man, the US really screwed us, this is our time to pack up and move and go overseas because we're going to have an easier time, I actually disagree. Many European laws that affect the adult entertainment industry, especially when it comes to data privacy, the EU, they are, in terms of laws and regulations, they are, you can drown in European privacy regulation right now. So that's not at the top of my destination. So, for those of you that are thinking, okay, well, that's it, this means I have to move somewhere else, or even that think that if I move there, I'm not going to get targeted. Well, as Larry said, and he's spot on, we already saw Paxton in Texas. He went after a non-US entity. He didn't care that, we're not going to name sites, it's not necessary today, but he didn't care that this one, particular tube site wasn't in the US. Didn't care where they were in Europe. Didn't make a difference to him. Same thing with what we saw with some of the civil actions that have been filed. Some of the civil lawsuits that have been filed against some companies are entities that have absolutely no presence in the US. You're not going to see state attorney generals, and you're not going to see state prosecutors say, well, we're just not going to go after them because, they're overseas. So the rationale to say, okay, well, we're going to jump out of the United States and now we're going to jump to some other country, it doesn't work in this case. It's not going to change. It's not going to change the reality. And quite frankly, it could potentially even make it worse depending on what that country's laws are.
Thank you for the answer. I have just a couple more questions and I'm done asking you guys some, then we can see if the chat has any. What are adult businesses, industry businesses to do from here? Is implementation of age verification necessary? Do platforms have to?
Yeah,
I mean, question for you, really.
I'll go first. I guarantee you, Larry and Mike are probably going to want to jump in on this one also. I mean, look, you don't have to comply with age verification. You do have other options. If you want to not have to deal with the state of Texas, you have the option of geo-blocking the entire state of Texas and making your website inaccessible to users in Texas. That is an option. A lot of people also have been suggesting that, users are very smart. Usage of VPN tools are through the roof. I believe that's accurate. I think we are going to see a massive VPN use, but, and here comes the caveat, we got a little problem. Some states and even other countries are aware of this now. And 2 days ago, the Ohio governor actually signed their age verification bill, which was buried deep in, I think Mike is probably better. I think it was buried within 3,000 pages of their Ohio budget bill. Age verification was in there, and they actually brought up VPNs. And this is where things are going to start getting interesting. So, website operators are now going to have to make some difficult decisions. But if they are going to ultimately provide content, provide their adult service within one of the states that has an age verification law, and remember, I said within one of the states, because we are at right now, I think 20, are we at 21 or 4, Mike? I can't, Mike probably has the exact number where we are. The number is going to grow. There's no doubt about it. A lot of states were waiting for the Supreme Court decision to move forward with their attempts. But at the end of the day, there are still some states that don't have it. But for the states that do have it, the answer to the question is, Clara, yes, website operators are going to have to make the decision. Am I going to do this? Am I going to geo-block, or am I potentially going to face some substantial fines? And some of these fines are, the numbers, will we say, are not easy on the stomach to digest.
24 million, right? If we're looking at some of these, right? In some cases. So these are huge numbers, as Corey said, right? Like they're going to be aggressive about this. You know, there are 24 states that are, you know, 24. Again, Corey is thinks I'm better at this than I am, but we do have a list. It's on action.freespeechcoalition.com. There's differences between some states that have passed laws and they haven't gone into effect, and others that some just recently went into effect. I think that what we're seeing is that, as Corey said, right, some states are getting in VPNs. I actually looked at the Ohio law. We've been monitoring it and been involved in actually trying to get it pulled out of that bill, which we were successful at some points, and then it went back in during reconciliation. We had no control over it, but you know, that law actually is maybe a little bit more positive. It talks about what looks like VPN language is actually geolocation language that says you have to geolocate and make sure that you're blocking people from Ohio. So it actually gives us a little bit more cover. In some places, geo-blocking may not cover you, right? The state may bring a suit and say, you know, this wasn't effective. There was still somebody in this state that was able to access it, maybe through a VPN, maybe because the geo-block wasn't complete. We're going to sue you. But I think that it is going to be an aggressive period. There are going to be people who are going to try to sue you for anything. We're going to continue to fight that, you know, and fight in states to come up with alternatives. Because I think that what gets misrepresented in the press a lot of times is that we either want minors on our sites. I think that's the advocates push that all the time, that you want minors on our sites. Everybody in the industry knows that they are a drain on the business, that there's no goodness aside from the ethical and moral implications of having minors on sites. But we can find other solutions. The Supreme Court has said that age verification is constitutional. Now, does it say that it has to be, you have to scan your face and you have to do this and you have to do it every time you go online? No. Could it be device-based? Could there be other ways to do it? Yes. And I think that that's something that, as this legislation has been moving forward, FSC and our partners have been looking at ways in which, is there a way to do this that is less burdensome to the consumer, right? That doesn't drive away 97% of the people who come to your site. Are there ways to, you know, again, I think as Larry or Corey brought, that the price goes down. So that it's not 50% of 50 cents of verification, that you're not paying $3 million each month in verification costs. Will we bring that down? Yes, I think that that's where we are now, because nobody on this panel wants minors on adult sites. If we can build a better mousetrap, if we can find a way to do it, I believe that we'll do it, and we will figure out a way to comply. I think that all sites need to be careful at this point, to your original question, Clara, in figuring out ways to limit their liability, and whether that's complying or geo-blocking, which again may not be perfect, it may not complete your liability. You've got to have a tough conversation with your legal counsel. You have to have an understanding of what your risk profile is and what your tolerance for risk is. And you have to make those decisions based on that. As we've seen in other states, they have gone after a wide variety of content. In Kansas, they sued MedArt, which, you know, is you know, as close as this industry gets to glamour photography, right? It's not, you know, it's not what we think of as, it's not Extreme Associates, or something like, right? It's a fairly vanilla site.
That pulls us back, Mike, again to the definitions and and the states were very careful. They made it overbroad and vague on purpose.
Yep.
That's why they used the words material that may be harmful to minors. I don't know what that means. That could be, that's going to depend what a judge or jury within that particular state ultimately determines when a case goes to trial. And so to your point, Mike, we don't know what that is. We don't know is a glamour shot with a little bit too much skin. Where is that line? We don't actually know yet.
Yeah, and a lot of the state laws even apply to text. The literature sites that discuss sexual activity could easily be covered. Some of the states talk about bizarre costumes or flagellation. I mean, there's some really odd inclusions in some of the states. So you have to look very carefully at each state's law to determine whether any particular content is covered. I did want to reinforce the issue on geo-blocking. I mean, none of these state laws explicitly state that geo-blocking is a defense or compliance method. We know that geo-blocking produces a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives. So you are taking some chances if you opt for geo-blocking as a quote compliance method, because somebody could easily slip through. There are VPNs. Ultimately, the burden is on the website operator to ensure that minors are not allowed on the site in the absence of age verification, and age verification is supposed to exclude them. So be careful in relying exclusively on geo-blocking and know that there are some risks there. And the only other thing that, in terms of what we do now is you've got to look at also your website terms and policies. There's going to be, new issues that are triggered by privacy policy compliance because you're getting new kinds of data potentially in connection with age verification. Do you want to have different terms for dispute resolution now that you can be sued potentially by users or minors who are trying to access the site through their parents? Do you want arbitration clauses? Do you want, jury trial waivers? All that kind of stuff is important to look at and discuss with your counsel.
And thank you guys for answering that question, and also my other question about geo-blocking, which I didn't get to ask, but you guys answered it anyways. It's really fantastic information to have. And then this is my last question. How safe are third-party age verification providers, and what's up with Florida's special requirement that the age verification provider must be US based?
Well, I'll leave the special Florida requirement to Larry since he actually is in Florida. Although I expected him to have more of a Florida tan for today, but he didn't. But the first part of the question in terms of how safe are third-party age verification providers, I mean, look, as a first comment, Clara, these age verification providers are dancing in the streets. They spent a tremendous amount of money fighting for age verification, not because they truly give a shit about age verification, but because ultimately it's now a very, very, very lucrative business for them. Well, congratulations, age verification providers. You guys got your wish. You're going to get to make a whole bunch more money at the expense of free speech. Bravo to you guys. I'm not a big fan, obviously, because they're all for-profit businesses. And now we're, for those of you that attend the trade shows, you guys are now seeing that these guys are setting up booths everywhere and they're giving away all their free stuff. And they're, now in a race between all of them down to the bottom for how much per age check and whatever. But, ultimately, how safe is it? Well, that's a good question, Clara. And, one thing I can tell you is that as long as I've been in the industry and as long as I've been part of the e-commerce community, my data has probably been hacked more times than I can count. I get emails probably on a weekly basis that I'm now in some class action lawsuit because Home Depot, lost all their data, or Target lost all their data, or every grocery store lost their data. There is no such thing, in my opinion, of an unhackable, a truly 100% safeguarded solution. So this is another thing that people now have to think about, and it's one of the big detractions. And I don't think the Supreme Court gave enough weight to this argument. Larry and I, in our amicus brief, we actually spent a considerable amount of time trying to argue this point about the dangers of now people supplying their government IDs to third-party companies. And, yes, the laws say that these third-party companies are supposed to destroy the data that they're collecting and they're supposed to safeguard it, and et cetera. But, is it truly safe? I say the answer to that question is no, Clara. And some people might disagree with me. I'm sure the age verification providers would be up here screaming at the top of the lungs about, how amazingly, perfectly safe their products are and how safe these systems are. But I don't believe they're 100% safe. And I don't believe that this is a good thing in terms of data privacy. I think that a lot of people who are going to, listen, people who want access to adult entertainment are not going to stop. They are going to, they're going to age verify, and they are going to do this. So, and do I think that at some point or another, we're going to see some sort of data breach? Absolutely. it's almost a guarantee, because I just assume at this point that my data has been hacked or stolen or published on some dark website 300 times.
Even, I mean, the thing is that even if you're looking at, even if you take the age verification providers, and we've seen them make a lot of broad claims. We go into the legislatures and they will say, well, you can do it with just your hand. A wave of your hand will identify it, right? They've been talking a lot of magic. But even if we were to accept that it is that, nothing is going to be intercepted when you're doing this, that everything is going to be deleted, right? Even if you take the bigger age verification providers and say, hey, listen, you guys are the good guys, you're doing everything right. And I'm not saying they are, but if we take that word, there are going to be a lot of providers who get into this business who may not, right? And there's no guardrails for them. Some states may create specific regulations where you have to meet this standard or that, but others are very broad. And if we know anything about this industry and about the internet in general, is that you're going to get people who are going to come in and they're going to say, hey, listen, for less than, a price of a cup of coffee, I can verify 100,000 people for you. And that's going to be very appealing, right? We're going to make it frictionless, and we're going to make it really easy. I think that there are going to be people who get in and don't destroy the data, right? I think that even with the big providers, it's hard to say how long does that data stay there and can that be observed or things like that. So I think that even if there are good actors in this space, even if there are people who are smart, there's still going to be a risk, because what's going to happen is people are going to get in who are not, not honorable.
Or even worse, Mike, the unscrupulous ones will sell the data.
Yeah, in some of the states, they caught one of the legislators asked a question in one of the states and said, "What are you going to do with this data?" And they said, "Well, we're going to monetize it, right? We're going to anonymize it, but we're going to find ways to do it." And as we know, with anonymized data, it can be reconstructed. As we also know, in some of these states, right, you ping a database. If you ping the DMV, well, does the DMV get a record of that? That you have tried to go to bound gangbangs, right? What does the state have with that? So I think there are lots of loopholes in here that we need to start to close. I think there needs to be more scrutiny on age verification providers, because we already have a situation where most consumers don't trust them, and that affects our business, even if they are entirely honorable.
So you asked about Florida. Initially, everybody in Florida uses sunscreen, because if we didn't, we'd all have skin cancer. So it's pretty brutal out there. That's why I don't have a tan. But in terms of age verification, it's a very unusual requirement in Florida. You have to offer users two different options. One is standard age verification, which typically looks like the operator reviewing IDs and saying this is okay, this isn't. And then secondly, you have to offer anonymous age verification through a U.S. owned and operated company. That's the only one of these laws that imposes a domicile requirement on the provider that you're using, right? So that limits substantially the number of companies you can go to, because a lot of them, frankly, are located overseas, where most of this started. So there's not that many in the United States. So it is a complicated one to comply with. If you're looking at age verification companies, you'll probably need to have one at least that is in the United States if you want to accept anybody from Florida.
There goes Florida again, just trying to be special and different, Larry. I don't know what you guys are doing down there. We're just making life more difficult for us. It'll be interesting though, Larry, because on the Florida element, we're going to have, I guess, at some point, we're going to have, it's almost inevitable. We're going to have someone claim that, no, I was using age verification, and the state of Florida is going to say, well, you were using an age verification provider based in somewhere in Europe, so you weren't complying, and so you're still screwed. Yeah. Makes things a hell of a lot more complicated.
And a lot of those things, I mean, also we see a lot of people use, I talked about the people who are doing biometrics or scanning your fist or whatever it is. But in a lot of these states, they don't allow for age estimation, or they don't allow for these the priors. So again, this is something where you really do have to talk with your legal counsel. You really do have to look at state by state what that regulation is, because it may be, oh, well, for half a cent we can do it, and we just scan your face and guess that you are over 18. And as effective as that may be, it may not qualify for a state law.
All right. So that takes us, Clara, to the most
Yes, I was about
dangerous
to
part.
wrap you guys up. I'm so sorry. Thank you all again for your answers and for taking the time to go over these questions with us. We are going to do some questions from the chat. I know we've run over our time a little bit, so we'll try our best to answer things as quickly as possible so we can answer as many questions as we can in the next 10 or so minutes. Depends on how long we'll run over, but I'm thinking about 10 minutes. So we'll see how quick you guys, or how many questions and how quick we can answer them in 10 minutes. All right, let's go, everyone. Be good.
Yes, I'm trying to flow through here to see who there we go. Let's see. We'll go with Brandon, because Brandon was nice enough to put question : so at least we know it's a question. So thank you, Brandon, for actually, using the correct grammar for us. So Brandon asks, I build login management software for site operators. How do site operators know when and where to implement age verification? Verify after purchase, verify before tour loads, etc. Where in the flow does it make sense? Brandon, that is an amazing question. And I'm going to tell you right now that I don't have a clue. And that is one of the reasons why these laws are fundamentally broken. Unfortunately, the laws were written in such a way that they don't really tell you specifically at what point does the age verification need to occur. And so we're seeing various different platforms taking various different approaches. Some websites are launching complete safe for work websites that then redirect to another website that actually has the adult content. Some websites are blurring all of the adult content up until the point where age verification takes place. Some websites are outright not blurring, but editing content. Your question is such a good question. I wish I had a definitive answer for you, but I really don't. And unfortunately, the way we're going to learn is we're going to learn this through the courts as case law develops through these things as to what judges and juries deem acceptable. But all of those, Brandon, are options right now. The most important thing, if I could give one piece of advice that's actually useful in answering your question, is that there should be absolutely no not safe for work content prior to age verification. That much I can definitively tell you. Larry, Mike, maybe you guys want to correct me if I'm dead wrong.
No, I completely agree. The only thing I would say is no matter how you design the system of age verification, it's got to be one that you're comfortable defending in front of a jury, right? It's got to make sense. It's got to be a story you can tell that illustrates how you've undertaken a good faith basis to comply with the law, that is not clear, that is vague, but you did the best you could with it and made sure that minors weren't accessing and were not exposed to harmful content in the journey.
Yeah. Great question, though, Brandon. All right, let's see who's next in the list of questions. Rob Fisher. I saw Rob Fisher. Do you think dating sites will be subject to these laws? Grindr recently added AV in the UK. That's a great question, Rob. And the reason why it's a great question is because we obviously have various laws that have been targeting dating apps for quite some time. But what it's really going to come down to, Rob, is in that particular state, does that particular dating site meet the definition? i.e., does that site cross the line in terms of having a percentage, whether it be 1/3 for the states that have it, and is that in fact material that might be harmful to minors? This is very much going to come down to what is being offered on that particular dating site. What product is there? What percentage of it? Clara's trying to stop me, so I probably screwed up.
No, I just want to say something really quick. And for a lot of people, it's probably going to be more geared towards things like FetLife, which I'm sure you probably all already imagined was coming in terms of age verification, but a lot of dating sites don't allow adult content on them. So I have a feeling that it's going to come down to a lot of the things that you guys mentioned previously, which is going to be lingerie allowance, what comes down to lewd, inappropriate content. And I think that's really going to be what it depends upon. But I think sites like FetLife, which are specifically dating websites meant for people who have fetishes, are probably going to be much more likely to be age gated than a lot of other sites. And I think most of you guys who do use dating sites will know off the bat which ones have adult content more than others.
Yeah, this was
It's
Grindr does have a lot
well,
of
this was the point Larry was making earlier, Clara. Larry was specifically stating that, you know, this is the slope that we're going to go down now, that this goes into the area of content moderation. And are we going to see platforms having to do more moderation than they historically have been? And the answer to that question is absolutely. That is the direction where we're going right now. So, you know, dating sites are going to have to, you know, be seriously taking a look at what they allow on their site, what sort of content is there. And they're, of course, going to have to deal with the nuances of a lot of these state laws, because as much as I'd love to sit here and tell you that all of these state laws are the same, they're not. Some of them have very specific nuances to it. So, Mike, you were going to chime in?
Yeah, just, I mean, in terms of, you know, the dating sites, if you're talking about Grindr, right now, if you're going on Grindr, you know, you don't get to see anything until you purchased a, you know, thing, right? There's, you know, images, but they're generally safe for work. However, if you look at a profile, as Larry mentioned, these laws generally include text. And so could someone bring a case and say, you know what, listen, my minor went on this app and he saw the word power bottom, or he saw prep, or he saw fisting, or something like that. And this is just sort of text. I think that was inappropriate. I think that was harmful. You know, I'm going to bring a case. Or, you know, there's plenty of sites and plenty of hookup sites that are anonymous. So I think that, and that goes to websites as well. When you're talking about a safe for work lender, could someone bring a case against, well, my website is called, you know, Cream Pie Facials, right? Even the URL at that point, like, could that be argued as material harmful minors? The thing is that we don't know. As Corey said, there's going to be a lot of case law, and there's always going to be, you know, when you're dealing with these laws, as with dealing with obscenity laws, and as you're dealing with sex, there's no such thing as safer sex, right? And when we're dealing with these laws online and our liability, there's always going to be some liability. There's always going to be the potential that an aggressive, zealot attorney general is going to go after a site and try to take it down. But you want to do as well as you can, given your risk, and trying to limit that. But there's going to be no way to eliminate the risk of this. You have to do, as I think Larry said, you have to be prepared to go in front of a jury and say, hey, listen, I tried to comply with this law. You know, I did my best. I wasn't trying to evade it. I did this, this, and this. And, you know, yes, this person is suing me, but I don't think that it should be found guilty.
It looks like in the mix of questions here, someone actually asked a very specific Larry question, because Larry's our online gaming expert. Larry, we got a question from 5 Star saying, does anyone know about folks in the adult industry coordinating with other industries that require AV, like online gambling? So Larry, that's probably a perfect question for you.
Yeah, you know, the online gaming and online adult entertainment industries are kind of siloed. There's not much crossover. There are some people that, you know, operate in both, have gaming sites and adult sites, but not very many. And you know, the online gambling sites have been subject to age verification from basically day one. Very strict verification, you know, submission of IDs and sometimes bank statements and utility bills and so forth, because of the nature of the activity. And given the fact that it's not First Amendment protected, there hasn't been really any challenges, any pushback. Everybody just understands, if I'm going to gamble, I'm going to have to give up, you know, my life's history in order to be approved for a deposit account. So, you know, the crossover, I think, will be limited. I think the online adult entertainment industry is going to try to seek a different form of age verification that is more frictionless than what the online gambling folks have had to put up with and the regulators require in the states that allow online gambling. So I would say there's not going to be much crossover.
So
Larry, I have a quick question about the online gambling. Is that my understanding is that a lot of those online gambling regulations are KYC that come from the banks as opposed from the government. Is that
There's a little bit of, so in order to get a license, some of the jurisdictions require that you institute a certain level of KYC, and also the banks have their own sometimes more strict requirements than even the gambling regulators. So yes, there is a mixture of both. And there, I see a question in the chat. You know, it seems like verification is usually upon funding. That's correct, because you're not actually gambling until you fund the account. So there's no, concern of being exposed to something harmful. Seeing a spinning wheel on a slot machine is not going to be alleged to be harmful. It's actually depositing your money and losing it that triggers the KYC requirements.
Max capacity, I think if I pronounced your name correctly, you went with MAHX. I think you were trying to say Max, but in like a cooler way. So you asked, do you think that queer/trans sites need to be especially cautious right now, given that so much of this AV law is going to be expressly used to censor queer/trans existence in other places? Or does it feel like these sites are operating with the same level of risk as others? That's a very good question. And I think that that's unfortunately going to come down to specific state attorney generals. I think that you're going to see in some of the further right-wing states that have been notoriously, I'm trying to think of a politically correct word, we'll just say have been notoriously bad to the queer and trans communities. I think, yeah, I think you could see them trying to utilize this to target queer and trans sites a little bit more. And I think, you should be exercising a large degree of caution. Do I think, though, that overall that's going to be the first thing on the list in kind of the overall AV landscape? No, I don't. But I do share in your concern that, a lot of the far right conservative states that have been targeting the queer trans community specifically, I think, yeah, there is reason to be concerned there.
I think it's everybody's got liability, right? It doesn't matter. You're going to have liability. I think that what we're going to probably see, and my sense is that attorneys general were fairly conservative prior to the Supreme Court ruling. I think that now that they've opened the gate, I think that they may decide that they're going to be a little bit more aggressive and maybe more targeted. So it may come down to that. They may go after sites that are, that they find are politically offensive or that are or politically valuable to go after. And I think that it's not just queer and trans porn. I think that it's queer and trans forums and things like that they may go after as well. Anything that they can make, a centerpiece of a political argument. I think we're going to see that type of thing happen.
We're going to do one more question, and then we're going to do a quick wrap up. But interestingly enough, I just received a text message and an unrelated, interesting breaking news. Who those of you that didn't know yet, Ken Paxton's wife just filed for divorce,
Yes.
citing recent discoveries.
Good
So
for her.
there's a little
Good for
interest.
her.
Thank you, Colin Roundtree, for passing that nugget along to me. So that's an interesting one.
I hope she gets so much money.
Yeah, look at that.
I mean, she drafted the age verification law in Texas,
Ugh.
so I am not happy with
Okay, never
either of
mind.
them. But
No,
she did.
I hope they both have a terrible time in court.
Yeah,
I'm going to be curious. I'm going to be curious to hear what these recent discoveries are. Maybe she caught him with the Gay Penguin book, Mike. But
or on a website because he had to age verify and his ID got left out.
it's possible. All right, so
Always a possibility.
we're going to take on one last question, and then we got to do a little bit of a quick wrap up here. Adrian Florin, you asked a great question. How much? I think you forgot the word "do." See, your grammar wasn't that great, but you're going to say, how much do you estimate in percentage that the sales of adult and creator sites will drop in the next period? Let's say 6 months, regarding this age verification process will go forward in much other states in the US, and also regarding that also in Europe started in a few big countries. Adrian, it's a great question. And I'm not a webmaster, but I represent enough platforms that I can tell you that my clients have already seen very different traffic patterns. But as Mike said, and I think Mike actually used the words correctly, he called it more of a traffic shift. And I think that's actually a very good term to use. So in my opinion, Adrian, what you're going to see is, I don't think you're necessarily going to see a massive drop. I think you're going to see it change. And in fact, I read an article yesterday saying that X, Twitter, their usage rates and search rates for adult content have actually skyrocketed. So, you know, in terms of, you know, what are you going to see in terms of a drop in sales? I can't tell you an exact percentage, but do I believe that there's some pain? Yeah, I do believe there's going to be some pain, but I also agree with what Mike said, that there's going to be a shift, and the webmasters out there are going to take account for that, and they're going to start adjusting, is my belief. But Larry, Mike, you guys have any?
I mean, this is the idiocy of these laws, right? So what you're seeing is that as people shift to safe for work trailers, or as they shift to places where they can't produce content until it is age verified, you're going to see people move their trailers onto social media, right? Which are theoretically exempted from a lot of these laws because of the 33 1/3% standard. So rather than decreasing the chance that a kid will access adult content, what you're going to do is you're going to flood these channels with adult content, because that's the only place that you could post them without running afoul of the age verification law. So it does the opposite of what people want. Again, as Larry pointed out, that may create a backlash from those platforms who want to then keep it under a third, and you might see them start to take down content that used to be acceptable on Twitter or Blue Sky. I did see right before this call, Blue Sky actually has said that they will comply with the UK law, and so the UK law, what they've said is, we're just going to require age verification for trying to access material that is harmful to minors. So it's not going to be for everybody, but if you try to access certain things, that's going to happen. So I think you're going to start to see a little bit more of a creative shift in this. It's going to be a lot of bycatch. There's going to be a lot of problems. We don't know, as Corey said, what the ultimate effect is going to be.
All right. So that being said, let's kind of wrap this up. First of all, I have to again thank SegPay for sponsoring today. We greatly appreciate your support and all of your hard work in supporting the industry and your individual contributions as board members in the FSC. Thank you for that. I want to personally thank my brother, Larry Walters. Never a dull moment doing these with Larry. We love it. So Larry, thank you so much. Mike, still one of the best speakers out there, my friend. And, you know, I know it's been a rough couple weeks for you, and everybody is grateful for the efforts that you made and continue to make. Clara, of course, you're the greatest hostess ever, but so you get to take us home.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you again, Corey Silverstein. I really appreciate you for having this event with everyone. Thank you all so much for your questions and for taking the time to join us and talk about this. Age verification is a really, really big deal for the adult industry. So we're very, very happy to help inform all of you.